In Victorian England, a creepy figure roamed the dark streets. He was Charlie Peace, a notorious murderer known for his deformed face and ruthless crime. Charlie's life was full of hardship and despair. His story is not only a revelation of the dark side of human nature, but also a profound reflection on how society shapes of individual. The Victorian era, 1837 minus 1901, was an important period in British history, marking the peak of the Industrial Revolution and the acceleration of social change. In this era, urbanization progressed rapidly, and many people flocked to cities in search of a better life. However, poverty, crime, and social injustice followed. The streets of cities such as London and Sheffield were full of filth and chaos, and many families lived in extreme poverty and lacked basic living condition. Against this background, Charlie Peace's story is particularly striking. He was born into a poor family and experienced countless hardships in his childhood. He had a deformed face due to a rare medical condition, which made him particularly isolated among his peers. Charlie suffered discrimination and exclusion since he was a child. And this experience planted the seeds of hatred and despair in his heart. Charlie Peace's story begins in a dark corner full of poverty, loneliness, and despair. He was born in Sheffield in 1832, a city with rapid industrialization but serious social problems. Charlie's family conditions were extremely poor. His father was a worker, and his mother took care of the children at home. With almost no source of income, the family's financial difficulties made Charlie face the pressure of survival since he was a child. Charlie's childhood was not happy. His parents often quarreled over their livelihoods, and the family atmosphere was tense and depressing due to economic conditions. Charlie and his brothers and sisters often did not have enough food or warm clothes. The cold winter forced them to squeeze into a small and dark room and rely on a meager firelight for warmth. Such an environment made Charlie feel helpless. He longed for warmth and care, but could only endure hunger and cold in the dark. Charlie showed distinctive characteristics since he was a child. Due to a rare medical condition, he looked much older than his actual age. He had obvious deformities on his face, which made him look out of place among his peers. Children often laughed at him and excluded him, making him feel extremely lonely. Whenever he walked into school, he could always hear his classmates whispering and laughing mockingly, and this experience dealt a severe blow to his self-esteem. In school, Charlie not only suffered from the ridicule of his classmates, but was also ignored by his teachers. His academic performance was not bad, but because of his appearance, he was always regarded as an outlier. The teachers were indifferent to him and gave him almost no encouragement. This feeling of isolation made Charlie gradually become introverted. He began to avoid interacting with people and could only silently endure the pain in his own little world. As time went by, Charlie's anger and disappointment with the world around him continued to accumulate. He longed to be accepted but was rejected because of his appearance. This contradiction made him more and more desperate. In his mind, society seemed to be a cold and ruthless place, and no one was willing to lend a hand. Faced with endless discrimination and exclusion, Charlie began to think about the meaning of his existence. After entering adolescence, Charlie gradually realized the huge gap between himself and the people around him. He saw that other children had warm family, friends, and a bright future while he could only live in the shadows. This contrast made him angry, and he began to be hostile to society after being rejected and ridiculed again and again. Charlie decided not to endure this pain anymore, and he began to look for other ways to get attention and respect. Initially, he tried to make a living by begging on the street. He used his story to gain sympathy, hoping to get some handouts. However, this method did not change his fate. He still encountered indifference and rejection, which made him even angrier. As time went on, he realized that begging could not solve the fundamental problem, but made him more humble. Eventually, Charlie chose crime as a way to survive. He began to engage in petty theft to get the money he needed to live. At first, he just wanted to fill his stomach. But over time, this behavior gradually evolved into a habit. He found that the money obtained through crime was much easier to come by than begging, which made him feel an unprecedented sense of power. Although Charlie gained a short-term satisfaction from crime, there was always an unspeakable pain deep in his heart. He knew that he was on the wrong path, but he couldn't extricate himself. At night, he often sat alone in the dark alleys and thought about his choices. Those thoughts that once longed to be accepted and loved kept emerging. Reality pushed him into a deeper darkness. Charlie still longed for warmth and care deep in his heart, but he could no longer turn back. He began to believe that he could only get everything he wanted through violence and fear. His dissatisfaction with society gradually turned into a disrespect for individual life, which made his crimes more cruel in his eyes. Those innocent people were just tools for him to vent his anger and despair. As time went on, Charlie Peace began to haunt at night and gradually became a nightmare in people's hearts. His presence seemed like an invisible shadow, shrouding the streets of Sheffield. Whenever night fell, the hustle and bustle of the city gradually subsided, replaced by a tense and uneasy atmosphere. Citizens locked their doors and windows and closed the curtains, fearing that they would become the next victim. Charlie Peace became the embodiment of their fear, and his name became a whisper in the dark corners of the city. Night should be a time for rest and relaxation, but in the city where Charlie Peace appeared, darkness became synonymous with fear. The streets were empty, and the occasional footsteps were terrifying. People whispered at home, discussing those horrific cases. Charlie attacked innocent citizens in an extremely cruel way. His atrocities were not only a deprivation of life, but also a challenge to the bottom line of human nature. Whenever the police issued a new wanted order, the citizens became more nervous. They began to remind each other to avoid going out at night as much as possible, and even to go to nearby small shops to go together. This kind of living condition makes the whole city filled with a sense of depression. People become cautious in their daily lives, fearing that they will become Charlie's next target if they are not careful. When choosing victims, Charlie usually observes pedestrians on the street looking for women who are dazed and hurried. He knows that many people are rushing home on the streets at night, and lonely women are more likely to become his prey. He uses his appearance and the dark environment to lead them into deeper darkness in the process. He shows incredible coldness and ruthlessness. Charlie is not just a simple killer. He's more like a hunter who enjoys the process of hunting. When committing crimes, Charlie often chooses remote alleys or dark corners. He knows that these places are rarely visited and can effectively avoid the appearance of witnesses. Whenever he approaches his targets, he will deliberately slow down and observe their reactions. At this time, the victims often feel uneasy, but due to the loneliness of the surrounding environment, it is difficult for them to seek help. Charlie takes advantage of this psychological state and leads them into deeper despair. Each case is accompanied by blood and fear. The cruelty of Charlie Peace's atrocities is outrageous. He is not only satisfied with killing, but also enjoys the psychological and physical torture of the victim. In his eyes, these innocent people are nothing more than tools for him to vent his anger and despair. He gets a twisted pleasure by inflicting great pain on them, which is closely related to the dissatisfaction and anger that has accumulated in his heart for a long time. However, the police feel helpless in the face of such cruel crimes. Although they try hard to track clues, Charlie always escapes cleverly. He's very familiar with the urban environment and is good at using dark alleys and hidden places to make himself disappear into the night like a ghost. This superb evasion ability made people more frightened, and they began to doubt whether this killer was really human. Charlie Peace was not only a murderer, but also a master of psychological games. He enhanced his sense of power by creating panic. After each crime, he would carefully observe the media's coverage of the case to understand the public's fear of him. His manipulation of fear gave him a twisted sense of accomplishment in the process of committing crime. As the number of cases increased, the public's fear of Charlie Peace reached its peak. Citizens began to close windows and lock doors at night, and even dared not go out. Whenever night fell, the city was shrouded in a tense and depressing atmosphere. People talked about Charlie Peace in bars and tea houses, and he became the protagonist of gossip. This situation made Charlie feel extremely proud, and he knew that he had become an indispensable part of this city. In order to capture Charlie Peace, the police spared no effort to launch a large-scale manhunt. They set up roadblocks, patrolled, and issued alerts to the public. However, no matter how rigorous the plan was, it seemed pale in front of Charlie. He always cleverly changes his route when the police are about to approach, and disappears into the alleys where prosperity and darkness are intertwined. This superb evasion ability makes people more frightened, and they begin to doubt whether this killer really has extraordinary humanity. He seems to have some kind of magic that allows him to move freely in the dark, while the police are like headless flies bumping into walls everywhere. This situation not only frustrates the police, but also makes the citizens deeply uneasy about their sense of security. In this complex and twisted story, there is a woman, Mary. She is the only person Charlie Peace trusts, and her love for him makes her turn a blind eye to his crimes. Mary's existence adds a touch of light to Charlie's dark life, but at the same time, it also makes her deeply trapped in it and unable to extricate herself. She believes that Charlie still has a kind side deep in his heart, but as time goes by, she gradually realizes that he is heading towards destruction. Although she tried hard to save him, she was powerless. Mary was born in an ordinary working-class family. Although her living conditions were not rich, she felt warm because of her parents' love for her. She showed kindness and compassion since she was a child, and often helped her neighbors and friends. Mary's life was simple and peaceful until she met Charlie Peace. Although Charlie's appearance was deformed, in Mary's eyes, he was a person who hid deep pain and loneliness. She was attracted by his story and longed to know the secrets deep in his heart. When Mary first met Charlie, she was not frightened by his appearance. On the contrary, she saw a soul abandoned by society, lonely and helpless. Charlie's eyes, full of despair and anger, deeply moved her. Mary believed that everyone has their own story, and there must be unknown sadness behind Charlie's story. As time went by, the relationship between Mary and Charlie gradually deepened. After they met by chance on the street, they began to communicate frequently. Charlie confided his experiences to Mary, and Mary responded to him with tenderness and understanding. In those lonely and long nights, they shared each other's dreams and fears, as if they had found each other's only comfort in this cold and ruthless world. Mary developed a strong attachment to Charlie, and she hoped to change his fate with her love. Although Charlie was trapped in darkness, Mary always believed that there was still a trace of kindness and warmth in his heart. She wanted to save him, get him out of trouble, and regain hope in life. However, this beautiful wish seemed so fragile in the face of reality. However, as time went on, Mary began to realize that there were deeper problems hidden in Charlie. He went out more and more frequently at night, and every time he came back, he was always flustered and covered with wounds. This change made Mary feel uneasy, and she began to doubt whether Charlie was really as innocent as he said. Despite her doubts, Mary still chose to believe in Charlie. She tried to guide him to the light through care and support, but every effort seemed to be in vain. Charlie's addiction to violence and crime created an insurmountable gap between them. He began to become more and more indifferent and turned a blind eye to Mary's care. After a fierce quarrel, Charlie angrily told Mary that he didn't need anyone's pity. He thought he was a person abandoned by society, and this anger made him more determined to continue committing crime. At this moment, Mary realized that she could not change Charlie, and she felt extremely desperate. Despite this, Mary was still unwilling to give up her love for Charlie. In her opinion, he was still the one worth saving. She began to try more ways to help him, including persuading him to seek professional help and stay away from dangerous interpersonal relationships. However, every attempt ended in failure, and Charlie showed strong resistance to any advice. He closed himself in a small, isolated, and helpless world and was unwilling to accept any outside intervention. As time went on, Charlie disappeared more and more frequently at night, and whenever he returned, he always brought a bloody smell and creepy silence. This change frightened Mary, and she began to doubt whether she really understood this man. Late one night, when Charlie came home again, Mary plucked up the courage to ask him, "What are you doing? Why are you always like that?" Charlie responded coldly, "I'm surviving. You don't know how cruel the outside world is." This sentence pierced Mary's heart like a sharp knife, and she realized that the man she loved was heading towards destruction, and she was powerless. Despite her heart full of fear and despair, Mary still chose to stay with Charlie. She tried to fill his emptiness with her love, but this effort was like shouting to the sea, and it was useless. Every night, she would worry about his safety, fearing that he would encounter an accident or do something more terrible. Sometimes Mary would dream of a Charlie who was different from their real Charlie, a warm, kind, and longing to be loved man in the dream. They walked together on a sunny path and talked about the future without worry. However, when the morning light shone into the room, these beautiful fantasies would be shattered in an instant, leaving only the despair and loneliness in reality. As the number of cases continued to increase, the atmosphere of panic in the city became more and more intense. people began to talk about the killer named Charlie P. And Mary became a forgotten part of the story. In people's eyes, she was just a person who accompanied the criminal, and no one knew the torment and pain she was suffering in her heart. Finally, on a cold and dark night, everything came to a head. The police received new clues about Charlie Peace and launched a large-scale manhunt. After learning the news, Mary felt a panic. She knew what it might mean. She tried to contact Charlie, hoping to persuade him to surrender, but there was only silence on the other end of the phone. Just as the police were about to surround his hiding place, Charlie chose to escape. He knew that he had no way out at this moment. He felt unprecedented despair and anger. During the escape, he recalled the good times he spent with Mary, and those warm and happy moments came like a tide, which made his heart waver. However, when he finally decided to go back to Mary, he found that everything was too late. The police have locked onto his whereabouts, and the city has fallen into chaos because of his atrocity. He knows that he can no longer escape, and he can no longer turn back. Finally, after a fierce pursuit, the police finally arrested Charlie in court. He faced severe charges, and at this time, Mary's concerned and sad face emerged in his mind. He understood that all of this was because of his choice, and the woman he loved was implicated. For Mary, she lost the person she once wanted to save and everything she once hoped for. After learning that Charlie was arrested, she felt an indescribable pain. That kind of love and despair intertwined, almost suffocating her. Despite this, Mary still chose to stand outside the court and pray for him, hoping that the person she once loved deeply could find redemption. However, in this story full of darkness and despair, she also understood that some things are irreversible, some love is destined to end in tragedy, and she can only silently bear the pain brought by all of it. After Charlie Peace was arrested, his story became one of the most shocking crimes in the Victorian era. Emily, a young reporter, recorded all this to let the world know the pain and despair behind this criminal. Behind every criminal is a tragic story, and Charlie Peace is such a complex and tragic character. His life is not only an exploration of the dark side of human nature, but also a profound reflection on the relationship between social responsibility and personal choice. In this story full of fear and despair, we see not only a killer, but also a person who is abandoned by society and heading towards destruction. The horror under the night is not only brought by Charlie Peace, but also a test of humanity that each of us may face.